В шахматах нужно усиливать зрелищную составляющую, потому что мне самому профессионально.
In September 2009, at the French Team Championship in Kolkata, a grandmaster sat down at board 1 and began his game against opponent Praveen Kumar. He opened with his pieces. He responded to Praveen Kumar's moves. And then, somewhere in the middle of the game, he fell asleep. Not briefly, not a momentary nod. He slept. Head tilted forward, eyes closed, completely unconscious, at a competitive chessboard, in the middle of a game, with a clock running. The arbiter was called, photographs were taken. Officials stood around the board unsure of what the rules actually said about this specific situation. The audience watched in silence. Praveen Kumar, the opponent, made his moves and pressed the clock each time. The grandmaster, still asleep, did not respond. The grandmaster's name was Vladislav Tkachiev. He was ranked among the top 100 players in the world. He had defeated some of the finest minds in chess history. He held the title of grandmaster at the age of 22. He was also drunk. And here's the part that nobody who tells this story ever leads with. He lost. Vladislav Tkachiev never became world champion. He never won a super tournament. He is not a name that casual chess fans recognize when they talk about the legends of the modern era. And yet the most gifted players of his generation described him as one of the most naturally talented chess minds they had ever encountered. Grandmasters who had trained for decades spoke about his intuition as something that could not be explained by preparation or calculation alone. It was something else, something rarer. Tkachiev possessed one of the most gifted chess minds of his generation. He also spent the better part of 20 years systematically destroying everything that mind could have built. That is the paradox this video is about. Vladislav Tkachiev was born on November 9th, 1973. In Moscow, Russia, then part of the Soviet Union, he grew up inside a system that treated chess not as a hobby, but as a national project. The Soviet chess machine, the most dominant chess-producing structure in history, identified talent early, funded it obsessively, and pushed it relentlessly toward the highest level. Tkachiev was identified early. He learned the game as a child in the way Soviet-era prodigies always did, through a coach, through structured study, through thousands of hours of analysis before he was old enough to understand what a career was. What set him apart was not discipline, it was pattern recognition, the ability to look at a position and understand its character, not by calculating every variation, but by feeling the weight of the pieces. Chess coaches who worked with young players across the Soviet system understood the difference between a child who calculated well and a child who understood chess. Tkachiev was the second kind. That distinction is not always obvious to outsiders, but inside competitive chess, it is everything. By the age of 22, Tkachiev had earned the title of grandmaster. He moved to France in the early 1990s as the Soviet Union dissolved, and chess players scattered across Europe looking for sponsorship and stability. France had a strong chess culture and a developing professional circuit. Tkachiev found a home there. He became French champion. He became one of the most recognizable figures in European chess. He was articulate, charismatic, and visibly gifted in a way that made other grandmasters take notice. The question was never whether Tkachiev could play chess. The question, and it would take years to fully answer, was whether he could be a chess player. Those are not the same thing. To understand what Tkachiev could do at a chessboard, you need to understand what separates a grandmaster from everyone else. A grandmaster does not simply calculate. A grandmaster navigates complexity. A grandmaster recognizes positions the way a musician recognizes chord progressions, not note by note, but as complete structures with meaning. Tkachiev did this better than almost anyone of his generation. His peak FIDE rating reached 2,672. That number requires context. Of the millions of registered chess players in the world, fewer than 200 have ever reached 2,600. To reach 2,672, you must consistently defeat players who have devoted their entire lives to the game, consistently, not occasionally. Every result counts. Every error costs. He won the French Chess Championship in 2006. He competed in elite international tournaments against the top players in the world and performed, not as an outsider hoping to survive, but as a genuine threat. Players prepared specifically for him. His opening choices were studied. His games were analyzed. That is not something that happens to players who are merely competent. Joël Lautier, himself a grandmaster and one of the most prominent figures in French chess, described Tkachiev's natural ability in terms that left little room for ambiguity. The talent was real. The capacity for the game was real. What surrounded that talent was the problem. Tkachiev's style was aggressive and intuitive. He played chess the way certain musicians play jazz, with an improvisational confidence that unsettled more technically precise opponents. Where other grandmasters relied on memorized theory to navigate the opening moves, Tkachiev trusted himself earlier. He moved off the main lines and into positions where calculation mattered less and understanding mattered more. In those positions, he was nearly impossible to beat. His games from his peak years are still studied today, not for their theoretical value, but for their creative decisions. Moves that looked wrong until they were proven right. Sacrifices that made no computational sense until the position unraveled. 20 moves later, exactly as Tkachiev had foreseen. That is not preparation. That is vision. Read that again. Moves that looked wrong until they were proven right. In chess, at grandmaster level, looking wrong is usually enough to be wrong. Tkachiev operated in a space most grandmasters were afraid to enter. Tkachiev had strong performances in the Capelle Grande Open Tournament in France, one of the largest and most prestigious open tournaments in Europe, drawing grandmasters from across the world. The tournament is not a super event. It is not the candidates. But performing convincingly against a field of over 700 players, including dozens of grandmasters, is not a small thing. But the moment that best captures what Tkachiev could be, what he was, in his finest hours, came not in a tournament result, but in the games themselves. There is a position from his career, reached in a critical game against a strong grandmaster opponent, where Tkachiev found a move that the engines of the era evaluated as unclear. Not good, not winning, unclear. He played it anyway. 14 moves later, the position had transformed into something the engines had not foreseen. What looked unclear at move 20 was crushing by move 34. Tkachiev had not calculated all 14 moves in advance. He had understood the position at a level that calculation could not reach. His opponent, a grandmaster with a rating above 2600, sat back in his chair and offered his hand. There was nothing left to say. The game was over. Not because Tkachiev had outcalculated him, because he had outunderstood him. That is the rarest thing in chess. And Tkachiev had it completely. Here's what most people get wrong about Vladislav Tkachiev. They frame the story as talent wasted by alcohol. That framing is too simple. It treats the alcohol as the problem when the alcohol was the symptom. The real problem ran deeper and was harder to name. Tkachiev did not become a professional chess player in the conventional sense. He became something stranger. A man of enormous chess ability who could not make himself conform to the structure that chess demanded. Tournament preparation, physical discipline, consistent sleep, consistent nutrition, the grinding, unglamorous routine that separates players who perform occasionally from players who perform reliably. He refused it, not with rebellion or declaration. He simply could not sustain it. The chess circuit at elite level is not forgiving. A single bad tournament can drop a rating by 20 points. 20 points at that level can mean the difference between receiving invitations to the top events and not. The top events are where the money is. The sponsorships, the visibility. The invitations come to players who are reliable, not to players who are brilliant 3 days out of 5. Tkachiev was brilliant 3 days out of 5. Tkachiev was brilliant 3 days out of 5. His results across the late 1990s and 2000 reflected this with uncomfortable precision. A dominant performance followed by an inexplicable collapse. A string of wins followed by a tournament where he visibly was not present, physically present at the board but mentally somewhere else. Opponents who had feared playing him began to hope they would face him on one of the other days. The alcohol became more visible. It was not hidden. At tournaments, it was discussed. At events where other grandmasters were preparing and resting, Tkachiev was not. The gap between what he could do and what he consistently did began to widen into something that could not be ignored. September 2009, Calcutta, India, the French team championship. Tkachiev arrived to play board 1 for his team. He sat down across from Praveen Kumar, an international master. The game began. Tkachiev made his opening moves. Then he stopped. His head dropped. His eyes closed. By the accounts of everyone present, he was fully asleep within minutes of the game's beginning. The clock was running. His time was ticking away. Praveen Kumar made a move and pressed the clock. The clock switched to Tkachiev's side. Tkachiev did not move. He was asleep. The arbiter was called. Photographs were taken by spectators, photographs that would spread across the internet within hours and reach every chess forum on the planet before the tournament day was over. The images showed a grandmaster, one of the top 100 players in the world, slumped over a chessboard in the middle of a competitive game. Officials consulted the rulebook. The FIDE rules at the time addressed players who did not appear for games. They did not specifically address players who appeared, began the game, and then lost consciousness at the board. A decision was made. Tkachiev's clock would continue to run. The game would proceed under standard conditions. If his time ran out, he would lose on time. His time ran out. He never woke up in time. The clock reached 0 while he remained slumped at the board, unconscious, as Praveen Kumar and the officials stood and waited. The game was awarded against him, a forfeit on time. A grandmaster ranked among the top 100 players in the world had lost a competitive chess game without making enough moves to finish it. Praveen Kumar later said he had been too distracted by the situation to play his best chess regardless. That is entirely understandable. There is no preparation for this specific scenario. Nothing in any chess training manual addresses what to do when your opponent falls asleep at the board, and yet the result still goes in your favor because the clock simply ran out. The photographs went viral. In 2009, that word meant something slightly different than it does today, but the effect was the same. Chess forums, sports blogs, and mainstream media outlets across Europe picked up the story. The images of Tkachiev asleep at the board were republished thousands of times. His federation responded. The French Chess Federation suspended Tkachiev from competitive play. The suspension was not permanent, but its message was unambiguous. This had crossed a line that professional chess could not tolerate publicly. Tkachiev's rating, which had reached 2,672 at its peak, had already begun its long decline. By 2010, it stood below 2,600. By 2015, below 2,550. Each number represents not just a statistical drop, but a narrowing of opportunities, fewer invitations, fewer high-level events, fewer of the games that had once defined him. He kept playing. He did not disappear overnight. He appeared in team events, in open tournaments, in the French circuit. There were still performances that reminded observers of what he had been, still games that displayed the intuition and vision that had made grandmasters take notice, but the trajectory was clear, and the chess world, which has little patience for unreliability at the highest level, had already made its calculation. Tkachiev himself never offered elaborate defenses or public statements of transformation. He was, by those who knew him, honest about who he was. That honesty was not redemptive in the conventional sense. It was simply accurate. There is a version of Vladislav Tkachiev's story that ends with the photographs from Calcutta. That version treats the sleeping grandmaster as a punchline, a cautionary tale about wasted talent, framed neatly within a single, embarrassing image. That version is incomplete. What the photographs captured was one moment in a career that spanned decades of serious, high-level competitive chess, a career that included a French championship, an elite rating, games that are still analyzed for their creative decisions, a talent that grandmasters who faced him consistently described as the real thing. The photographs also captured something that the chess world found difficult to process, a man of extraordinary ability who could not be contained by the structures that professional chess required. That is not a comfortable story. It does not resolve cleanly. It does not teach a lesson that fits on a poster, but it is an honest one. Tkachiev later became involved in chess broadcasting and commentary. His understanding of the game, the deep, intuitive understanding that made him dangerous at a board, translated naturally to explaining chess to audiences. He could see into positions in real time and articulate what he saw in ways that instructors with twice his communication skills could not match. The talent did not disappear. It found a different expression. Joel Lautier, reflecting on Tkachiev's career, noted that in terms of pure chess understanding, Tkachiev was among the most gifted players France had ever produced. Not the most successful. The most gifted. That distinction mattered to Lautier. It mattered to the grandmasters who had played him at his best and understood what they had encountered. Magnus Carlsen, who grew up studying the games of the generation above him, has spoken about the importance of chess intuition, the quality that separates players who calculate from players who understand. Tkachiev understood, fully, without reservation, in a way that showed up in his games long after his preparation had failed and his discipline had collapsed and his clock had run all the way to zero. He sat at that board in Kolkata while the seconds counted down, unconscious, unable to make a single move. And when the officials finally called the result, a forfeit, a loss, the most undignified ending a competitive chess game can have, what remained was not the defeat. What remained was everything that had come before it. Every game where he had looked at a position and seen something no one else could see. That is not a story about failure. That is a story about what talent actually is. Some players are remembered for what they built. Vladislav Tkachiev is remembered for what he was. And what he was, at his best, was something that cannot be manufactured, cannot be coached into existence, and cannot be diminished, not even by sleep, not even by a clock ticking down to nothing while the whole chess world watched.